In 1798, Napoleon's warships appeared off the Egyptian coast. By 1920, European powers had conquered nearly every corner of the Middle East. Britain and France carved up continents like hunters dividing spoils. India, Africa, Southeast Asia all fell under European rule. At the height of colonialism, Western powers controlled 85% of the Earth's land surface. The Middle East, cradle of civilization, was no exception. The British claimed Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan. The French seized Syria and Lebanon. The Italians took Libya. Even the ancient Ottoman Empire collapsed, its territories divided among hungry European powers. Yet in the middle of this imperial feast stood one holdout, a vast, untamed desert kingdom that no European power managed to claim: Saudi Arabia. This wasn't some forgotten backwater. The Arabian Peninsula occupied one of the world's most strategically vital positions, the crossroads of three continents, guardian of holy cities and controller of crucial maritime routes. So why did the empires that conquered India, subdued China, and dismantled the Ottoman Empire fail to colonize Saudi Arabia? Why did the same powers that redrew maps of entire continents leave this territory untouched? In London's colonial offices and Paris' diplomatic chambers, the Arabian Peninsula wasn't ignored. It was coveted. British intelligence officers filed detailed reports on its tribes and terrain. French diplomats schemed to extend their influence. The Ottomans had claimed nominal control for centuries, yet somehow, this seemingly vulnerable desert land managed what ancient, powerful empires could not. It maintained its independence through the entire colonial era. This historical anomaly wasn't the result of a single factor, but a perfect storm of geographical challenges, fierce tribal resistance, diplomatic maneuvering, and simply being at the right place at the right time in history. To unlock this mystery, we must first understand the colonial chessboard, the high-stakes game of global dominance that threatened to engulf Arabia, but ultimately failed to capture its vast expanses. Our journey begins with nature's perfect defense system, the harsh, unforgiving terrain that became the first guardian of Arabian independence. Picture yourself as a 19th century British general ordered to secure a new colonial possession in Arabia. Before you stretches an ocean of sand, one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. The Arabian Peninsula is dominated by the empty quarter, Rub al-Khali, the largest continuous sand desert in the world. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Sandstorms can appear without warning, burying everything in their path. This wasn't just any desert. At over 250,000 square miles, the empty quarter alone is larger than France. The entire Arabian Peninsula offered few reliable water sources, minimal agricultural possibilities, and punishing terrain that broke both men and machines. Unlike India with its fertile plains or Egypt with the life-giving Nile, Arabia offered no obvious centers to control. The population lived scattered across vast distances, primarily as nomadic Bedouin tribes that moved with the seasons. As one British explorer wrote, Saudi did not have anything desirable in it. The terrain was difficult, a lot of deserts and mountains. European military expeditions that ventured into the interior rarely returned with encouraging reports. When the Ottoman Empire, at the height of its power, attempted to control the Arabian interior, their forces were decimated not by battles, but by the land itself. Troops died of thirst. Supply lines stretched beyond breaking point. Garrison outposts became isolated islands in a sea of hostile terrain. Colonial powers thrived on establishing administrative centers, controlling transportation networks, and extracting resources. Arabia defied this model at every turn. Its scattered population couldn't be effectively taxed or controlled. Its apparent lack of valuable resources failed to justify the enormous military expense required to subdue it. The colonial blueprint that worked so effectively across Africa and Asia simply couldn't be applied here. The desert served as nature's perfect defense system, a geographical immunity to the colonial disease spreading across the globe. But geography alone doesn't explain Saudi Arabia's unique path. After all, other harsh environments eventually fell to determined colonial powers. To understand the full picture, we must look beyond the land to the people who called it home. A people whose unconquerable spirit would become the second barrier to colonial ambitions. While Arabia's harsh terrain deterred would-be conquerors, it was the people shaped by this unforgiving land who truly made colonization impossible. Unlike the centralized kingdoms of Europe, Arabia functioned as a complex patchwork of fiercely independent tribes. There was no single leader to defeat, no capital to capture, no centralized government to overthrow. These weren't simply scattered communities. They were warrior societies. Every man was prepared to fight and die for his tribes, honor and independence. Their hit-and-run tactics were perfectly adapted to desert warfare, allowing them to vanish into vast expanses where conventional armies couldn't follow. As one Saudi historian put it, simply because of the Saudi tribes around Arabia, they never accepted foreigners to rule their lands. When the Ottoman Empire tried to establish direct rule, they faced relentless resistance. Foreign soldiers who ventured into tribal territories faced an enemy who knew every water source, every hidden pathway, every desert ridge. An enemy who could appear from nowhere, strike decisively and disappear again into the sands. Even today, oral histories preserve these struggles. We still have the Ottoman graves near my village where battles were fought and won. Our grandfathers told us how they would ambush foreign soldiers who didn't know how to survive in our lands. Ottoman records reveal constant frustration with their inability to extend authority beyond major settlements. British diplomatic correspondence shows reluctance to commit military resources against such elusive opponents. European colonial armies excelled at defeating conventional forces in pitched battles. But the tribal resistance in Arabia never played by these rules. There were no massed formations to target, no supply depots to destroy, no strategic bridges to capture. The Bedouin warriors combined intimate knowledge of the terrain with astonishing horsemanship and marksmanship. Their system of tribal alliances meant that attacking one group could trigger widespread resistance across vast regions. This was a people described by contemporaries as too proud and too tough to subjugate, a description backed by centuries of successful resistance against outside powers. But Arabia's relationship with external powers wasn't simply one of constant conflict. To understand the full picture, we must examine the complex dance between Arabia and the declining Ottoman Empire. A relationship that was neither fully independent nor truly colonized. To understand Saudi Arabia's unique path, we must acknowledge a crucial paradox. For centuries, much of the Arabian Peninsula was technically part of the Ottoman Empire, yet never truly conquered. The Ottomans claimed Arabia on paper and maintained garrisons in strategic coastal locations like Jeddah and Al-Hassa, but their actual control was remarkably limited and fragile. As one historian notes, the Ottoman Empire controlled a small part of Saudi, and they did it by proxy. Saudi still had its tribe rulers. This arrangement was less colonization and more negotiated influence. Unlike Ottoman provinces in the Levant or North Africa, Arabia existed in a state of semi-autonomy. Ottoman officials collected minimal taxes from port cities and occasionally intervened in tribal disputes, but wisely avoided attempts to impose direct administration across the vast interior. The Ottomans' primary concern was protecting the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. As guardians of Islam's most sacred sites, they gained religious legitimacy while allowing local sheriffs and tribal leaders to handle day-to-day governance. Paradoxically, this limited Ottoman presence actually helped shield Arabia from European colonization. European powers hesitated to directly challenge Ottoman claims in the region, preferring to undermine Ottoman authority elsewhere. As one modern historian explains, territories that were never colonized. The first reason is that the Ottoman Empire controlled the coastal regions of Arabia. Their presence created a buffer that kept European powers at bay. But don't mistake this arrangement for acceptance. When Ottoman authorities attempted to expand their direct control, they faced immediate and fierce resistance. The relationship was always tense, with periodic rebellions forcing the Ottomans to scale back their ambitions. For centuries, this delicate balance persisted, the Ottomans claiming authority while local tribes maintained practical autonomy. Neither fully independent nor truly colonized, Arabia existed in a unique middle ground. But as World War I drew to a close in 1918, this centuries-old arrangement collapsed. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, finally crumbled, creating a dangerous power vacuum across the Middle East. As Britain and France rushed to divide the Ottoman remains, Arabia faced its most vulnerable moment. With no Ottoman buffer remaining, what would stop European powers from finally bringing this unconquered land under their control? To answer that question, we must understand the cold economic calculus behind colonial expansion and why Arabia initially appeared to offer poor returns on a costly investment. Colonialism was, at its core, a business venture. European powers didn't conquer territories out of mere ambition. They sought profit. Valuable resources, taxable populations, and strategic trade routes all factored into the colonial equation. While India offered spices, cotton, and millions of taxable subjects, while the Congo provided rubber and ivory, while Egypt controlled the vital Suez Canal, Arabia seemed to offer virtually nothing of comparable value. As one historian bluntly put it, the main reason is that these were poor countries until oil was found, and by then colonialism had gone out of fashion. This economic reality shaped European calculations about Arabia for centuries. Even the population presented challenges to potential colonizers. Unlike settled agricultural societies that could be easily taxed and controlled, Arabia's predominantly nomadic Bedouin tribes were constantly on the move. British and French colonial surveys repeatedly concluded that Arabia was resource poor. No major rivers for irrigation, minimal agricultural potential, few obvious mineral deposits, and a sparse mobile population resistant to taxation or control. As one modern analysis states, Arabia simply wasn't valuable. The vast majority of the population was nomadic and thus incredibly hard to tax. The cost-benefit analysis simply didn't add up. Colonial powers required extensive infrastructure to maintain control: administrative buildings, military garrisons, transportation networks. In the vast Arabian desert, these would be enormously expensive to establish and maintain. Military planners estimated that controlling Arabia would require stationing thousands of troops across inhospitable terrain, with extended supply lines vulnerable to constant tribal raids, all for what appeared to be a land of little economic value. Imagine you're a British colonial administrator in 1900. Would you invest enormous military resources to control a vast desert with seemingly little return? Or would you focus on regions offering clear economic benefits? European powers instead opted for a more pragmatic approach, controlling strategic coastal points while largely ignoring the interior. This limited engagement preserved both European resources and Arabian autonomy. But the colonial calculus failed to account for one crucial factor: human leadership. While European powers saw a barren desert, one remarkable man envisioned a unified kingdom, a leader whose vision would transform scattered tribes into a modern nation-state. While European powers debated Arabia's value, a remarkable leader emerged who would reshape the peninsula's destiny through sheer force of will. The history of Saudi Arabia as a nation began with the emergence of the Al Saud dynasty in Central Arabia in 1727. For nearly 2 centuries, this family fought to expand their influence across the fractious tribal landscape. Critical to their rise was a powerful alliance with religious reformer Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. This partnership fused political authority with religious legitimacy, a potent combination that distinguished the Al Saud from rival tribal leaders. But by 1890, the Al Saud had been driven into exile in Kuwait, their lands seized, their power broken, their future uncertain. It was here that a young Abd al-Aziz ibn Abd al-Rahman al Saud, later known simply as Ibn Saud, began planning a seemingly impossible comeback. In 1902, with just 40 loyal followers, the 26-year-old Ibn Saud launched a daring raid to recapture Riyadh. Under cover of darkness, they scaled the city walls, overwhelmed the garrison, and restored Al Saud rule in a single night of audacious courage. Over the next 3 decades, Ibn Saud demonstrated extraordinary political and military genius. He unified warring tribes through strategic marriages, revived the religious mission of his forefathers, and methodically expanded his territory against both Ottoman forces and rival Arabian dynasties. What made his achievement truly remarkable was his ability to transform ancient tribal rivalries into a shared national identity. He balanced traditional Bedouin values with the pragmatic requirements of modern state building. By 1925, he had captured the Hejaz region, including the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. By 1932, he controlled enough territory to proclaim the establishment of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a new nation carved from ancient lands. This was a vision realized against overwhelming odds. A leader exiled from his homeland had returned to unite a peninsula that empires had failed to conquer. Where Europeans saw only inhospitable desert, Ibn Saud envisioned a unified kingdom. But unifying Arabia internally was only half the battle. To secure his new kingdom's independence, Ibn Saud would need to navigate the dangerous waters of great power politics, particularly with the British Empire. A relationship that would prove critical to Saudi Arabia's continued independence. While Ibn Saud was unifying Arabia internally, he faced an equally daunting external challenge: managing relations with the British Empire, the dominant global power of the era. By the 1920s, British power encircled the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, Transjordan and Palestine to the north, Egypt and Sudan to the west, Aden and smaller Gulf protectorates to the south, India to the east. Saudi Arabia was effectively surrounded. Historical records show that the treaty established Saudi Arabia as a British protectorate, but not a colony. In return, the British aided Saudi Arabia and other Arab states. This crucial distinction, protectorate versus colony, would preserve Saudi independence. Ibn Saud proved himself a diplomatic genius. navigating these treacherous waters with remarkable skill. He understood Britain's primary interests in the region: secure routes to India, stability in the Middle East, and countering other European powers. Rather than resisting British influence entirely, he negotiated arrangements that protected Saudi sovereignty while addressing British concerns. The 1915 Treaty of Darin and subsequent agreements established a relationship that benefited both sides. Britain gained a stable, friendly buffer state without the expense of direct administration. Saudi Arabia received recognition, protection from external threats, and limited military support, all while maintaining internal autonomy. As one historian notes, the British never did anything in Saudi. They were involved in Yemen, though. This restraint wasn't accidental. It reflected a calculated British decision that direct colonization wasn't worth the cost. Imagine how differently Middle Eastern history might have unfolded if Britain had attempted direct colonization of Arabia. The resistance would have been fierce, resources stretched thin, and religious backlash severe, potentially threatening Britain's position throughout the Muslim world. Ibn Saud also skillfully played competing powers against each other. When British support seemed insufficient, he opened discussions with the Americans. When religious conservatives objected to Western influence, he emphasized his independence from foreign control. This diplomatic balancing act created a unique arrangement. Saudi Arabia maintained genuine independence while benefiting from British protection. It was neither colonized nor truly isolated. But Ibn Saud's diplomatic skill was matched by extraordinary historical timing. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was established at precisely the moment when the age of European colonialism was beginning to wane. A critical window of opportunity that would prove decisive for Saudi independence. Timing, they say, is everything. And Saudi Arabia's emergence as a unified kingdom occurred during a critical historical window that dramatically improved its chances of maintaining independence. On September 23, 1932, Abd al-Aziz ibn Abd al-Rahman al-Saud established the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This wasn't just any period in history. It marked the beginning of the end for the great colonial empires. The First World War had severely weakened European powers. Colonial populations, having fought for their imperial masters, returned home with new ideas about self-determination. Anti-colonial movements were gaining momentum across Asia and Africa. The international mood was shifting. The League of Nations emphasized new principles of sovereignty. American President Woodrow Wilson had proclaimed the right of all peoples to self-determination. The era of naked imperial conquest was drawing to a close. As military documents reveal, following Ottoman dominance, Egypt controlled Arabia from 1818 to 1824. For the remainder of the 19th century, Egypt, Britain, and the Ottomans vied for control of the region. But by the 1930s, this scramble had given way to a new international order. Had Ibn Saud attempted to create Saudi Arabia 50 years earlier, during the height of European imperial expansion, the outcome might have been dramatically different. Had he delayed 50 years, regional dynamics would have been transformed by oil wealth and Cold War politics. The timing was fortuitous in another crucial respect. The Great Depression gripped the world's economies, making costly colonial adventures increasingly difficult to justify to domestic populations struggling with unemployment and hardship. Britain, particularly, was reassessing the costs of its vast empire. Direct colonization of Arabia, with its challenging terrain and resistant population, seemed an unnecessary expenditure when a friendly relationship with Ibn Saud could secure British interests at minimal cost. Ibn Saud seized this moment of imperial vulnerability to secure international recognition of Saudi sovereignty. By the time the world emerged from depression and war in the mid-1940s, Saudi Arabia's independence was an established fact. But another factor would soon transform Saudi Arabia's position, one that could have led to renewed foreign intervention if discovered earlier, but instead became the foundation of Saudi power. A discovery that would change everything, black gold beneath the desert sands. On March 3, 1938, American engineers drilling in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia struck something that would forever change the kingdom's destiny. Not water, but vast reserves of oil. Black gold buried beneath the seemingly worthless desert. The timing of this discovery proved extraordinarily fortunate. Had oil been found decades earlier, when European colonial ambitions were at their height, Saudi Arabia's story might have ended very differently. Historical records confirm petroleum was discovered on March 3, 1938, 6 years after Saudi Arabia had secured its independence and international recognition. The kingdom was already established when this game-changing resource was revealed. Consider the fate of other oil-rich territories. Iran, where British petroleum essentially controlled the economy. Iraq, where Western companies dominated oil production under colonial administration. Venezuela, where foreign corporations exercised enormous political influence. Instead of falling under foreign control, Saudi Arabia negotiated from a position of sovereign strength. The Arabian-American oil company, Aramco, was created through agreements that gradually increased Saudi ownership and control. Ibn Saud shrewdly balanced immediate financial needs against long-term sovereignty. While welcoming American technical expertise, he maintained strict control over Saudi territory and gradually secured better terms as the scale of oil reserves became apparent. Imagine if colonial powers had known about Saudi Arabia's vast oil reserves in the 1800s. Would Britain or France have committed the massive military resources needed to subdue the peninsula? Would Ibn Saud have been able to unify the kingdom against such determined opposition? By the time the full scale of Saudi oil wealth became clear in the 1950s and 60s, the age of decolonization was well underway. Rather than threatening Saudi independence, oil became the foundation upon which the kingdom built its modern power and influence. Unlike colonized regions where resources were extracted primarily for foreign benefit, Saudi Arabia's oil wealth remained largely under national control, funding massive infrastructure development, education, and healthcare programs. But as oil transformed Saudi Arabia's global importance, a new relationship emerged, one that would replace Britain as the kingdom's primary foreign partner and create a complex new dynamic of independence and interdependence. The arrival of an American superpower on the Arabian stage. As the smoke cleared from World War II, the global chessboard was dramatically redrawn. European colonial powers retreated, exhausted and diminished. In their place rose a new superpower, the United States of America. After World War II, the United States gradually replaced Britain as the dominant Western power in Saudi Arabia, solidifying the country's independence in a new way. The foundation of this relationship was simple: oil. America needed secure access to Saudi Arabia's vast petroleum reserves. Saudi Arabia needed technology, investment, and protection in an increasingly dangerous neighborhood. The pivotal moment came in February 1945, when President Franklin Roosevelt met King Ibn Saud aboard the USS Quincy in Egypt's Great Bitter Lake. This historic encounter established a partnership that continues to this day: Saudi oil for American protection. By 1951, A mutual defense agreement formalized this arrangement. American military expertise began flowing into the kingdom. Saudi officers trained at American academies. American weapons equipped Saudi forces. For Saudi Arabia, this relationship offered protection from regional threats without the loss of sovereignty that characterized traditional colonization. The kingdom maintained its independence while gaining a powerful guardian. The Saudi leadership navigated this new relationship with remarkable skill, balancing American protection with their cultural and religious independence, maintaining authority over domestic affairs while aligning with American interests internationally. The price of that protection was, and still is, a deeply complex relationship. Saudi Arabia gained security but sacrificed aspects of its foreign policy autonomy. America secured vital energy resources, but became entangled with a monarchy whose values often diverged from its own. While much of the developing world was forced to choose sides in the Cold War, Saudi Arabia managed to secure American protection, while maintaining its cultural and political independence. This raises a provocative question. Did Saudi Arabia avoid traditional colonization only to enter a new form of dependency? Or did it simply adapt to changing global realities while preserving its essential sovereignty? As we examine Saudi Arabia's unique historical path, we discover lessons that extend far beyond its borders. Saudi Arabia stands as a historical anomaly, a nation that navigated the colonial era without becoming a colony. This unique path has profoundly shaped its modern identity, regional position, and global relationships. Compare Saudi Arabia with its neighbors. Iraq, shaped by British mandate. Syria and Lebanon, molded by French administration. Egypt, transformed by British occupation. Each carries the institutional, cultural, and psychological imprints of their colonial experience. Some scholars challenge the simplicity of this narrative. There may have been no colonization, as in the Levant, by European armies, but the Ottomans did invade the land for many years. The truth, as always, lies in the nuances. Saudi Arabia's experience raises profound questions about the nature of colonialism itself. Is formal political control the only measure? Or do economic dependency, military protection, and cultural influence constitute subtler forms of colonization? For Saudis themselves, this history has fostered a powerful sense of exceptionalism. Their narrative emphasizes self-determination, religious continuity, and cultural authenticity, values directly linked to their uncolonized past. This historical path has practical consequences today. Saudi leaders approach international relations with a confidence born from centuries of successful diplomatic maneuvering. They expect to be treated as genuine. The kingdom's security strategy still reflects lessons from its history, balancing external protection with internal strength, avoiding dependence on any single power, and maintaining the capacity for independent action. Perhaps most significantly, the absence of colonial extraction meant that when oil wealth arrived, it remained largely under Saudi control, funding development that served national rather than foreign interests. Saudi Arabia's experience offers broader lessons about historical determinism. Geography matters. Timing is crucial. Leadership makes a difference. Resource perceptions shape geopolitical calculations, and resistance, whether through arms, diplomacy, or cultural cohesion, can effectively counter seemingly inevitable historical forces. As we look to the future of the Middle East, how will Saudi Arabia's unique historical path continue to shape its destiny in our rapidly changing world? Will the advantages of never having been formally colonized continue to benefit the kingdom? Or will new global challenges require new adaptations? Saudi Arabia reminds us that history is not predetermined, that seemingly invincible empires have blind spots, that seemingly powerless regions can maintain their independence through a combination of circumstance, strategy, and resolve. A kingdom of sand that defied an age of empires.
This is Bites of Goats, where we don't just talk about history, we learn from it. See you in the next one.